and our topic this week is innovation that makes customers' lives easier. I think is a fascinating topic, and I think one that's going to be of great interest to the audience. So just like to introduce to you our speakers, and we also have our speakers on webcam link for the introductions. And so welcome to Guy Fielding from Horizon 2. Guy, you sort of worked in consultancy for a number of years, and I know that you've written a very well thought out paper on customer effort. So I'd encourage anyone to anyone in the audience to download that after the webinar. We'll include a link in the post materials that we send out. So welcome to you, Guy.
Thank you.
And we're also joined by Ed Creasy from Nice Systems. Ed, you've got a background in consultancy as well, and you're going to be looking at 3 technological innovations that make customers' lives easier. So I think some fascinating stuff. So welcome to you, Ed.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
So we're now going to just turn off the webcams as we crack on through the webinar. We'll bring those back on during question time. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be in the chat room, callcenterhelper.com/chat. We're going to be doing tips and questions during the webinar, and there is a box of champagne or box of chocolates, sorry, bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip there. Replay is available on the same link as you've dialed into today. We'll be sending those links out tomorrow. I know a lot of you do like to share the links with your teams. And if you go to the chat room, simple to log on, no commercial messages through this chat room, please. And once you're logged in, you can download webinar slides from this link here, so slides for both of our speakers. But what I'd like you to do now in the chat room, I'd like to ask a question. We're going to be looking at innovation and customer effort. So in 1 or 2 words, please put into the chat room, how innovative is your contact center? So for instance, very innovative, sometimes not very, or just any way that I think describes the state of innovation in your contact center. So I think we've got Ian, Miles, Leslie, Martin, Claire typing in. So Leslie says, definitely sometimes. Chris, very innovative, as is Ian. Claire says, we're behind the rest. Christina says, in progress. Miles, not very. Martin says, we try to be very innovative. Matt says, not very. So quite a range of different responses there. Rachel says, fairly. Tim says, sometimes. Ian says, we're a bit behind the times. Joey wants to learn some new ways. And Jill says, we're behind the others. Michael says, I'm with Martin 10 in that we when we try. And Guy rather humorously says, what is the opposite of innovative? So quite a range there. So that's quite interesting to know. And let's have a look at the other side of the debate we're looking at is customer effort. So I'm just going to put the poll up. It says, do you measure customer effort in your business? And select all that apply. So do you measure the customer effort score? Do you measure net easy? Do you measure customer effort through some other method? Do you not measure customer effort but are planning to do so, or do you not measure it at all? So I think this is going to be quite a fascinating poll. Guy, where do you think customer effort score is going to fit on this list?
I have to say I don't really know. It will be very interesting to see, because clearly there's been a lot of discussion about customer effort, but I'm not sure how widely people have been, first of all, wanting to measure that, and secondly, exactly how they've gone about it.
Well, let's take a look at the let's have a look at the results up on the screen now. So we have 16% of people are measuring a customer effort score today. What's quite fascinating, nobody is using the net easy method, which is a derivative of the customer effort score made into a kind of a net promoter type of field. We've got an article on that on CallCentreHelper, developed by BT. 16% are measuring it by a different method, and if you've selected other, if you could perhaps put some details into the chat room would be interesting. 30% are planning to, and 44% of the audience don't measure customer effort at all. Ed, are there any surprises in those results for you?
No, not really. I think if we're talking about measurement, really care and NPS particularly are the things that I see mostly. And for me, I think the research shows some interesting correlations. I think Guy will touch on this. And intuitively, I think for most people, we know if you make it easy to do business with an organisation, it should lead to loyalty. And I'll share some data later from our consumer poll that reflects that.
Yeah, and a lot of people in the audience are saying they measure customer effort sort of indirectly through the Net Promoter Score, and Ian says we measure customer effort in some detail, so quite a range of different scores overall. So what I'm now going to do is going to pass the baton across to Guy Fielding from Horizon 2, and Guy, if you could introduce yourself and take us through your thoughts on how innovation can make customers' lives easier, and sort of look at customer effort.
Thank you, John T. Well, I'm actually going to start or do my bit, not by looking at specific innovations, but kind of stepping back a bit and saying it seems obvious that easier should be better, but perhaps it's worthwhile examining that easy assumption.
Could we just pop your slides up on the screen, Guy?
I've got them up, and
I can see them.
To me, and I'll pass across to you again just to see if I can get them working okay. In fact, maybe just a problem at my end.
Okay.
Just press show my screen.
Yep, I've done that.
Fine, there we are. Brilliant.
Okay. So as I was saying, my background is as a psychologist, and it seems to me useful to start by actually saying, well, what's the evidence that making people's lives easier is a good thing? If it is, what are the mechanisms, and also what are the implications? I think we can start by, if you like, saying, imagine somebody who's made a contact. Afterwards, how do they decide whether that was a good thing, whether they're satisfied, etc.? And we have got very good evidence now that customer effort, or rather the inverse of that, customer convenience or ease, is a major driver of customer satisfaction. And in a sense, you say, well, why is that interesting? Because that then in turn leads to behaviors, customer behaviors that organizations want, and such as repeat purchase, recommendations, and so on. But I think there's a key thing to remember here. The research that we've done at Horizon 2 says that, yes, this is an important driver, but it's rarely the primary driver of CSAT, NPS, and so on. The primary driver is task resolution. Does the customer get their job done? Does the customer get the outcome they wanted? If they do, then CSAT tends to be high, and if they don't, it's low. Customer effort then comes in as a second modifying factor. If you get your job done and it was hard work, then you're less satisfied than you otherwise would have been. Even if you don't get your job done, but you realize that that's the case quickly and easily and clearly, then the lack of satisfaction is ameliorated, is lessened by the fact that that negative outcome was achieved with very little effort. So, it's important that customer effort is a factor here, but it's not the only one. Task resolution is more important. Now, you then get, in a sense, a second bite of the cherry, because if you think of going through the actual contact, then customer ease at this point is good, because in general, if things are easy, if they're simple, if they're straightforward, it's more likely that the customer is going to complete their task, and they're going to do it without errors, without omissions, without repeating, and so on. So making things easy is a second driver, because it drives task resolution, and we've just seen that that itself is a primary driver of CSAT. Thirdly, there's a very important reason why making things easy for customer is a good thing to do. When people are choosing whether or not to do something, or choosing between different ways of doing it, or between different services offered by different organizations, then one driver is liking or wanting, if you like, our attitude. In general, we choose to do things we like, and we avoid things we don't like, that we dislike. But there's a very important second dynamic in these choices, and that's whether or not we think we can do X or we can achieve Y. When we choose, we're balancing how good something is, the liking, with how likely we think it is that we can achieve that, a kind of can-do factor. So we often don't pursue things not because we don't like them, but because we believe we can't do them. If there are skiers listening to this, you'll be very familiar with this. You stand at the top of a black run, and you might like to ski down it, but in fact you choose to go down the nearby red run or the blue run because you look at that black run and think, I can't do that. I might like it, but because I can't do it, I will choose something that's less attractive in preference. Now that has a big implication for organizations. It's not just about making things easy for customers, but making customers believe that they are easier, and getting, if you like, that knowledge widely spread. A note here that, of course, there are two senses of ease at play here. One is when you're actually doing it, how easy it is, but it's also about ease of access. You know, we used to talk about this as trialability, and it's a very important factor looking ahead. If you like, so far it looks like, yes, it's obvious making things easy is a good thing to do, but is that always the case, and what are the limits on that? And here, if you like, you've got some other evidence which says, before we rush into this, there may be something else going on. There's actually good evidence to say that making life easier isn't always the best thing to do. Retrospectively, when we're looking back on things, we tend to see things involving more effort, more skill, more cost, as better than those where there's less effort or skill or cost. Psychologists have been studying this for about 50 years, and it's a well-known phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance or self-perception theory. And there are lots of examples, initiation ceremonies and rites of passage, the way that you price free trials or introductory offers, costing in general. Just think about fashion, and what's valuable in fashion tends to be the most expensive and difficult to get hold of. Medicines and medical procedures, the placebo effect, is a very well-known example of where easier isn't better. There's something else going on here that we need to be aware of. Secondly, if we... I
suppose the danger is, though, that making yourself really difficult to get hold of from a customer service perspective wouldn't necessarily be perceived as very high value.
That's absolutely right, but remember that exclusivity and restricting access to some things does make things attractive to people. I'll come back to the customer service element of this, but what I'm really trying to flag up is maybe we need to be a little bit cautious and a little bit sophisticated about before we rush into the notion that easier is always better. Yeah, that's the idea I'm exploring. In a sense, we also know that in terms of the things that we are doing, moderately complex, difficult things tend to be more interesting and engaging than simple, easy things. Think about games and puzzles, sports and hobbies, music, art and decoration, even if you like conversation and presentations or webinars like this, that we don't always like the thing that is the simplest or the easiest. In general, we're happiest when there's a balance between demands and resources. When those are out of balance, for instance, when demands are much greater than resources, we call that stress. So, you know, making things really difficult is not a good idea. But also, when resources are very much greater than demands, we call that boredom. And almost no one likes being bored. So again, there's something else going on here that we should take note of. Finally, as human beings, we're all aware that we often choose to do things that we know are difficult. Either they're just at the limit of our capabilities, or sometimes they're even beyond them, and we choose them in order to learn how to increase our capabilities. Perhaps the most famous example of this was President Kennedy, announcing the project to land a man on the moon, and his famous speech at Rice University in Texas was, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." And that's a theme in human behavior. The motivators of challenge and mastery are very powerful and pervasive, and should caution us against too readily assuming that easy equals better.
It puts me in mind of an insurance company I once talked to who were very much into customer loyalty, and they said that the best thing that could actually happen from customer loyalty to them was for someone to put in the claim. Sort of daft as it sounds, because that was the time when they could really show the value of the insurance.
And again, it's I guess the trick there, and I use the word trick advisedly, is the process needs to be easy and simple, but also, if you like, engaging and involving. And at that point, easiness sometimes isn't the best way of doing that. What I realize I've done here is, I've given some contradictory evidence and examples, and the hunt is now on for the one-armed psychologist. On the one hand this, on the other hand that. That's all well and good, but it's not very helpful when you're trying to decide what to do. So what I've tried to pull together are some principles which make sense of this rather contradictory set of propositions. Here's the overarching principle, and they really involve two principles. One is, are you choosing? And secondly, is this about means or is it about ends? When it's an end in itself, and you, the person doing this or the customer, have chosen to do it, then in general, interest trumps ease. That you actually like things that are a bit difficult, a bit involving, a bit engaging. When, if you like, it's simply a means to an end, and particularly if it's imposed on you, you don't get to choose either to do it or the way it gets done, then making it easy is the most positive dynamic. The point, of course, is that in general, customers don't call or contact us because they want to, but because they have to. And the processes we put them through, they haven't designed or chosen to take part in. So in general, this is your point, Joumey, is that in customer service situations, making things easier will in general make things better. But I guess the rider to that is Maybe there are other situations where organizations are communicating with their customers where those principles don't apply. If I can, a final couple of points. A really important principle, I think, is that when we're thinking about making things easier, it's important to recognize that this is from the customer's point of view. From the organization's point of view, making things easy for the customer might involve an awful lot of hard work, some very complex technology, some sophisticated analysis, and a lot of time and effort and money. When we're talking about making things easier, it's making things easier for the customer. I think it's also important to remember that when customers look at organizations, they don't do it on a channel-by-channel basis. They do it in terms of the jobs they need to get done. And I think one of the dangers that we currently run is the proliferation of channels, which I know Ed is going to elaborate on shortly. That isn't necessarily making life easier for customers. Instead, it's making things more complicated, more effortful, as they struggle to get their job done across a multiple disconnected or badly connected channels. So making things easier for customers has to be done strategically from the point of view of the customer and the jobs they are wanting to get done. And if organizations can realize and accept and implement that customer-centric approach to channel strategy, they're going to do well. Those who simply think channel by channel, I think, are missing the point. So those, I hope, are some useful opening remarks, and at that point I'll hand back to John T. and then to Ed Creasy.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Guy. I think there's some fascinating food for thought there. Just one thought, in making stuff easy for customers can actually be quite complex for the organization. We've been making a number of things on the website easier for customers, and sometimes it's quite horrifically complex within the organization to do that, to make it look like it's easy. So there's, I think, quite a skill between that. What's your take on that?
I think that's absolutely right, and in a sense the history of computing is a very good example of that. When computers had little power, then the front end that the user was managing tended to be very complex. As we've got more computing power, we've used an awful lot of that power to make things easier at the front end for the customer, for the user. But an awful lot of processing is going on in the background. This webinar, as a computing exercise, is a very good example of that. However, I think there's then a second order when the organization has to look at its own processes and say, are we making ourselves work hard here, making our lives miserable, and are there ways that we could simplify our own work as well as our customers?
Indeed, and Guy, you talked about the proliferation of channels that came up. So we want to ask the question of the audience. We've got a poll up on everyone's screen now, and the question is, which channels do you believe have got the highest customer effort? Is it voice? Is it self-service? Is it email? Is it web chat? Or is it social media? So you can vote for more than one of these, but if you can select what you think are really the channels that have the most amount of customer effort. So if you'd just like to vote on that now, I think this is going to be quite interesting. Ed, have you got any thoughts about where you think the audience is going to be voting?
Yeah, I would say self-service would be my suggestion.
So well, let's have a look at this. So let's put the results up on the screen now. We have a sample size of 106 on this. So the votes are 60% saying voice, 36% at self-service, 28% email, 12% web chat, and 10% social media. Ed, that's sort of quite surprising that voice is such an effort there. What's your take on that?
It certainly sort of juxtaposes with the data I'm going to share from our survey, where I think as human beings we're we want to communicate as widely as possible with the range of emotions we have available, and I think that's why voice is attractive to us. But also because of the the typical silos we see in many contact center organizations, it can be the place where you're transferred and handed off and repeat calling. So you've got the repeat caller element of voice, but also you've got the queues and poor service levels. So I think there's a big contribution from those two issues.
And I think it's interesting web chat there, because I do wonder with voice, if we took the queue away from voice, would it be such an effort channel, and maybe the authentication? But web chat is sort of seen as the glory day now. Guy, I don't know if you believe that's because it's the latest trend, so everyone's staffed it up. Often on web chat I get through straight away, but I have noticed a couple of times when it says you're number 6 in queue and you've got to wait 5 minutes to get through to a web chat.
Yeah, yeah. I have to say I'm slightly puzzled and again cautious about these results, because I'm not quite sure what we're meaning in this question. If you take voice, for instance, it seems to me that voice as a channel is the easiest for human beings to use. We've been doing it for about 40,000 years now, and most people come into the world using it as a channel. So as a channel, I think voice is very easy to use. I think what people are pointing to here is that when you use your voice to try to get jobs done, the processes you hit that are delivered via the voice channel are often very clunky and very difficult.
Yes, and Ian has made the point. It's maybe people are confusing voice with complicated IVR, which certainly does get in the way of.
That's right, and the processes you have to get through in order to get to a live agent. So I think all of those are factors, but I also think that many times the processes that the agent is managing on behalf of the customer are unnecessarily complex. If you then flip that, one of the things that happens in the self-service channel is, in order to get the process into the self-service channel, often an awful lot of redesign and simplification has to take place in order to achieve that. So I'm not challenging the poll results. I'm sort of saying understanding what they're telling us may be a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I think there may be a research piece that we might want to follow up here with a questionnaire to go down into some detail. Right, question of the audience: do you measure customer effort across different channels? So if you are measuring customer effort or a derivative of it, for instance, indirectly through Net Promoter Score, are you doing that across different channels? Be interesting to see. Martin makes a comment: some issues are only solvable through actual voice-to-voice conversation, and the effort is not too high if you have a high availability. David said in terms of different channels, we currently don't look at channel switching. We've got Ron says no channel switching here, so we're not measuring. Vinay says we measure customer effort across voice, email, and chat. So a sort of a very long response we've got in from Ian as well. So quite a range there. So I think some great food for thought. We're now just going to go across and have a quick look at some of the audience top tips that have been sent through. We have a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip. Ian says physically looking at the journey that leads to a call is very useful, and also looking at the customer experience over the last few hours, etc. When you have all of the answers. And they're saying it's quite useful if you can actually map, using various technology, the journey from the website into the call center. So some quite interesting insight there. What's your view on that, Guy?
I think this is absolutely spot on. It seems to me that part of our problem is we're all focused on the contact center and making that efficient, and we neither have sight of nor any power to influence the things that cause those contacts in the first place. And it goes back to the point I was making, is most of the people I know are not longing to call organizations and interact with their customer service. So if we can eliminate those contacts, that's the easiest journey of all.
And talking of a customer journey, Leslie says having a universal view of the customer to understand their journey through all of your services and ways to contact you, so you can help them and give amazing service. She's put in a PS, we've also introduced web chat too. Christina said, we've introduced the password manager tools for our customers to be able to unlock or reset their own passwords without having to ring up the support center. This has eliminated customers' wait time, allowing them to return to their business. Ed, that strikes me as a sort of great example of how to use technology to sort of almost eliminate, call avoidance.
Yeah, I agree completely, and as you know, we'll talk about that shortly. But ultimately, as customers now, we have more power than we've ever had before, and any barriers that are put in our way are perceived as customer effort. So we're having to manage God knows how many passwords at the moment, and simplicity when I change a password, which I regularly forget, is critical.
Claire has said, preempt what customers are going to call about using the power of social media and the information shared from news sources. That's quite useful. If you're aware of what is going to happen, then you can give your frontline customer-facing teams the best tools and knowledge to do the job. I think certainly knowledge management's quite a key part of it. And you can again give the best experience to aim to achieve a single interaction. Interesting one from Paul. Get the cart before the horse. It's critical that frontline customer service staff are empowered to make customers' lives easy. There's a huge difference between doing your job and serving the customer. To do the second one, we might need to break the rules at least, or think outside of the box. Guy, breaking the rules or thinking outside of the box is not something you'd naturally associate with working in a contact center.
No, quite the opposite. But I think there is a point here. 2 points go right back to the studies we've done about what drives customer satisfaction. The first two are task resolution and customer effort, but the third is what we call judgmental heuristics, and it's the fact that when customers experience either an oh no moment or a wow moment, the positive example of that, that tends to overrule the normal rational decision making. It kind of floods the judgmental field. And I think the point that Paul's making here is that where you get wow moments from is breaking the rules, and they have an incredible impact on customers' perception. The flip of that, of course, is the oh no moments often come from agents rigidly sticking to the rules, when a bit of flexibility, a bit of innovation would in fact generate a wow moment.
And in fact, Leslie's tip, we've recently empowered agents by unclipping their wings and removing some of the barriers and processes that stop them doing what was best for their customers. So I really think that ties in with what you were saying there.
I was going to say, thank you, Leslie. You put it much more neatly than I did.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to move on with the agenda now, and I'm delighted to introduce to you Ed Creasy. And Ed is going to be looking at 3 ways that technology can help to make customers' lives easier. I certainly enjoyed watching this presentation during our rehearsals, and I think there's some very strong messages you've got, Ed. So would you like to take us through the technological angle?
Absolutely. And so good afternoon, everyone. And I think Guy's put forward a very interesting hypothesis for someone working for a software company to deal with, which is clearly reduced effort for customers is a good thing, but there are some moments where a bit of effort is valued by us as customers. So I'm going to give a short presentation to talk about NICE's approach to reducing customer effort, and I'm going to show you 3 ingredients. Now these can be used together or separately that can take us that extra step towards reducing customer effort and providing that exceptional customer experience we're looking for. To kick off, I'm going to talk about the recent global survey we've done across 2,000 consumers across the world, and I think that really resonates with some of the messages that have come out today. The first thing to stress here before I talk about the data is, as we know, customers have completely changed. So we've got access to more information, which gives us more knowledge. We're accessing via more channels, and if anything goes wrong, we have a cast of thousands on our social media sites to complain to. So as organizations, we know the customer is now in control. And if you see from the data we found here, on average, customers are using 5.8 channels to interact with service providers. So really what we're saying here is customers are using more channels, yes, and that is more effort for the organization both to manage but also to understand. Moving on, I think we see, certainly from what Joumey's been saying about these service interactions when we really don't want to be putting effort in, the data really reflects that. So 96% of customers showing they'll reward low effort with greater loyalty, which is a very strong trend there. Now, being a middle-aged old fart, I'm very happy with this data, is that people still want to talk to people. And you know, and I think this is simply important because when we are in a situation where we have to describe with the nuance of emotion our situation, I think it's extremely hard to do in those other channels. The one thing I would note, though, for everyone on this webinar is the millennials, and I base this on a sample of my stepdaughter, who cannot communicate via voice. There is a whole generation coming up into our customer bases who prefer to communicate via text. And we've got to work out how we deal with some of these more complicated interactions that typically we use voice for in the future. And finally, the data here is pretty obvious, I think. You know, people prefer an engaged and authentic agent than a focused and impersonal one. Where we found some remarkable data was what people felt delight was. So back in the day where we first started talking about delight as a concept, probably in the late 90s, you know, being engaged and authentic was definitely seen as delighting your customer. Now, the only thing customers saw from our survey as delight was a personalized experience. So really what this whole story is saying is customers are expecting more, they're communicating over more channels, and voice is still an important channel to them. So I'm going to take you through these three ingredients. They're not just technologies, but they're also the methodologies around it. And I think that's really important when you're talking about effort, is technology does solve the problem, but as organizations, you're also going to have to wrap around deploying these processes very well and deploying these technologies well. So we're going to start with the journey. Now, as we've seen from the survey, 5.8 channels means customers interacting with many channels and data exists in those channels. And unfortunately, that data typically isn't joined up in organizations, so we need to connect them together. And we have an application called Customer Engagement Analytics, which does that, which helps people understand that cross-channel engagement. And we've seen on chat that there's a lot of people who are trying to do this, take action to reduce the steps involved for customers, and then track those improvements, so to make sure it's a full closed loop. And I think we're going to start with a typical customer journey. Now, hopefully, as consumers, you should certainly relate to this journey. So here we've got a customer who starts off buying something in store. And then the next thing they receive, because in store they signed up for the loyalty program, gave their email address, is they get an ad for a product they already own. Moving on, they call in because they've recently purchased a gift. Now, the agent is sitting in the call center. There's web analytics in another part of the business, but it's not connected up. So the agent has to ask me a bunch of qualification questions that actually they would be able to avoid if simply they had my web history there and they were able to see every page and every search that I'd done. And then finally, I call back in to get my loyalty discount. And you can see, because they're not connecting up the customer journey, because they don't have all the sources of data together, my loyalty discount is missing, so that's creating more demand. So this is a journey we're seeing a lot with the organizations we work with.
I think you see that in all sorts of different organizations. It's probably quite widespread, I'd suggest.
Yeah, we've got to be careful not to make assumptions about organizations, but we see this everywhere. And I think if you look at it at the individual level, it's challenging, but this visualization here is to say, well, what does it look like at the corporate level? And suddenly, if you imagine your millions of customers are taking 5.8 channels, and every journey is unique. So really the challenge now is how can we measure this and improve this when these journeys are repeated and multiplied across millions of different individual customer journeys. So, for example, if you look at this journey, to overcome this, the organizations they'll need to identify every unique journey of every customer, and only then, when you understand the unique journeys, can you understand the context of those, what happens on each step, and then you can efficiently and effectively reduce the number of steps in those journeys. So looking specifically at the product, this is one of the visualizations from the product. This is the way we visualize the customer journey. And we do this by collecting data from everywhere. So a project I'm currently working on has over 40 different data sources. And we're talking IVR, voice, CRM, feedback, voice recording, speech analytics, complaints, web pages. All these different sources that come from the customer interactions are being pulled into one data warehouse, and then we're able to creatively visualize that journey. So if you look at this specific journey, in the middle of the screen of this octopus diagram, we have 324,000 voice interactions. Now we can look backwards in time, and you can see 59% of them didn't have a previous interaction, but you know your eyes are drawn to the 17.8% of customers who are on the web. So one of our listeners has picked this out already as a very important piece of analysis to do. What page were they on the web that led to the next call? How long were they on the web? Was it customers who were on the web for just a short period of time, or was it those customers who were on the web for a long period of time? So by connecting up web data with voice data, you can actually see which of your web pages is driving customers into your contact center. In the same way, we can now see the connection where 32.4% of customers go on to make a follow-up voice contact in the next 7 days. So to give you a real case study of how this works for one of our customers, this customer looked at specific processes and mapped the customer journey for those processes. And the one that jumped out to us was what it was a telco customer, the retail activation channel. So we looked right across the different channels of the experience when a customer bought a phone. And what we found for the voice channel is, of all the customers who bought a phone in the voice channel, 30% of them were calling back within 7 days to activate their email. Now, this seems obvious, really. A lot of people would know this intuitively, but it was only when we visualized it and they could see how many customers called back quickly to activate email, they had the evidence to say, well, if we increase our handle time for the first voice call, go through email configuration, yes, we're going to increase handle time, but we're going to reduce our overall contact volume and make the experience much better for the customer. So it's much, much less effort for the organization and less effort for the customer. So now I want to show you what a journey really looks like when a customer is connecting up this data. So here we have Lisa, and Lisa is a fan of cookery, and she's shopping in a bricks and mortar shop, and she goes in and she buys a chef's knife. Because they know that she just bought a product, she receives a CSAT survey and via SMS, and she states in the free text in the verbatim that she's happy with her purchase. Now, because the organization knows she's bought this knife and she's happy with the purchase, when she's browsing the shop's website, and based on the feedback, she receives a personalized offer while she's on the web pages to complete her knife set with carving and filleting knives based on a substantial discount. Because she's a happy customer, they want to make her happier. Then she calls into the call center because she's considering 2 different brands and she wants to know which one to go with. Now, the agent knows what she's bought previously. So by asking a few questions based on the knowledge they know about her, the fact that she likes the knife script, the balance, the design, they recommend she sticks with the current knife. Then a few days later, she gets an email offer to attend a knife skills class because the organization knows she's now got a set of knives and she may need those skills. She signs up for the class online because it seems like this customer knows her really, really well, downloads the mobile app, and in the future is going to chat to them because she knows every time she interacts with this organization, they know her really well. So this is the kind of vision that you can deliver once you start to connect up all this data. Okay, so let's move on to another channel, another opportunity. Now, it's really important for me to say is I know you all listen to your customers. Long gone are the days, and the data that I'm going to share with you shows you that we all listen to our customers. But we think not every organization is really listening. So let's define what really listening is. So there's 3 elements we think are important. Firstly, we call this holistic voice to the customer. So you need to listen to everything, everywhere. So listen obsessively to all the different channels. And we're not just talking about surveys here, we're talking about interactions, we're talking about the transactions the customers are having with you. And once you're doing that, it's to react with a sense of immediacy. So this is listening and acting at the right moment following that feedback or the interaction with the customer, not waiting weeks, as can happen with customer surveys. And finally, and I think most importantly, is taking action and operationalizing this. So this is having a performance management program, a voice of the customer program, a quality management process where VOC is at the heart of it. So before we go any further, I think Jonty's going to do another poll to look at how we're collecting feedback at the moment.
Yeah, so we're going to drill down into listening to our customers, and what we're going to do is ask the question of what are your primary ways to collect customer feedback. Do you do it through call monitoring? Do you do it through analytics? Do you do it through a post-call IVR survey? Do you do it through an email survey? Or do you do it through text messaging? If you've got any other answers, if you'd like to pop those into the chat room. So it'd be quite interesting to see, Ed, I know you had a long background with analytics. It'd be quite interesting to see how many people are using analytics. That was quite a niche pursuit a couple of years ago. So let's just pop the results up on the screen for everyone. Well, 64% use call monitoring, which is probably the biggest. Surprisingly, that's actually higher than email surveys based on the number of surveys that seem to get sent by email these days. And very encouraging, 26% of people are using analytics now. So it's really has started to make it into the mainstream now.
Without doubt. I mean, you know, I was in the very early days of interaction analytics when no one would even believe it worked, you know, and now the key thing that happened with that application was customers started using it, they started to learn how to deploy it, and that's more powerful than any consultant telling you that it works. People started using it, and then you have the scalability of all the customers in the industry using the application and coming up with the use cases. There's no doubt it adds value, and it just makes sense. You know, when you've got you know, thousands, millions of interactions, and you can only listen to 0.5%, it really does make a difference.
Okay, brilliant. Do you want to take us through your rest of your listening to the customer?
Absolutely. Okay, can you see my screen?
Indeed, we can.
Perfect. So the reason we're passionate about really listening to your customers is this data here. Now you can see, this is from Gartner, and you can see that 98% of us are collecting feedback. So we're all doing it. About half of us are sharing it with their staff, and you know, reasonable amount use insight and analytics on that data. Where I think it makes a real difference is the people who are making changes on the back of this customer feedback and closing the loop. And you can see that's where the huge opportunity is for organizations. So there's three elements that you need to consider when you're doing an innovative voice of the customer program. Firstly, it's about engagement and collection. So you have to capture absolutely everything. So when we talk about voice of the customer, we're not talking about surveys. Your whole philosophy of collecting surveys has to change to one of, I want to poll the customer on every single interaction they have with us, not just surveying a small percentage every few months. Secondly, you need to take the interactions, because there are things you can find out in a voice interaction, in a text interaction that you can't find out in a survey. And finally, you've got to look at social media and right through the transactions that they have in your organization on the web to really understand the journey. Once you've got that engagement and you've collected it, it's about using advanced analytics tools to carry out thorough analysis. So you can identify the real meaning behind the data, what processes are driving effort, what's hidden in those interactions, and then predicting the customer journey as we've seen. So with nice voice of the customer, we combine speech analytics and text analytics with customer journey analytics, so you can predict and prevent the next call, and then advanced categorization and root cause analysis of the verbatims, which we're used to seeing within a customer feedback program. But as I said, most importantly, it's about action and transformation. The key principles we have here is automation, real-time, and alignment to organizational strategy. So for an example, if you've got customers who are detractors, you get smart alerts to say this customer has scored you a 1 or a 2 on the scale. In the same way, we can do it from the interaction. If you've got a customer who's saying, I want to speak to a manager, or I'm frustrated, or this is unacceptable, again, we can flag those in an automated way to a supervisor or an outbound team, and you can make a proactive contact with this customer. And that proactive contact needs to be managed through case management tools, and then finally the data from those sources integrated in performance management. So in summary, your VSO program has to start with action in mind, and it has to have these three core components. It has to have direct feedback, so understanding how the customer feels, indirect feedback, so you understand what happens in the interaction, and finally this inferred feedback, so we can look right across that customer journey. Okay, so finally we're going to look at real-time authentication, so the use of voice biometrics. Now, we all are familiar with the interrogation that goes on. So, we're bombarded with multiple questions during a typical authentication. It's a poor experience. We're dissatisfied with it. It's not secure because we're often asked the same questions, and the overall experience is being interrogated. And we have a better way of doing it, a better way than the mother's maiden name or the embarrassing first pet's name, which I cannot share with anyone because it's too embarrassing. Recently, some people have been doing user-defined questions, which seems like a great idea, but there's a whole thing on the internet about doing the most embarrassing question and answer for an organization. And there has been IVR authentication for a while. You should look it up, John T. It's hilarious.
I think I will.
Again, I can't quote any of them. And IVR authentication has been slightly effective, so people have been able to authenticate in the IVR, but we know from research that 20% of all IVR complaints are about authentication, and 74% of customers have failed to authenticate effectively. So we want to share with you a better way, but just before we go to that, we're going to do a poll just to find how long it takes on average for you to authenticate.
Okay, so the question is, how long does it take you in your organization to authenticate a caller? Is the answer we don't authenticate? Is it 0 to 14 seconds, 15 to 29 seconds, 30 to 59 seconds, or is it more than a minute? So just like to vote on the poll. How long on average does it take to authenticate a customer? I guess even with the average, there's going to be some wild variance on there. So let's just share the results up on the screen there. So it looks like on average, the average is about, or the highest value there is 30 to 59 seconds. The average probably at least 30 seconds on there, I'd say, overall, with small number taking it well over a minute to authenticate. So quite a range of different times to authenticate. So Ed, back to you.
That was really interesting data, and actually it very much reflected the data that we found from both our research and the surveys we've carried out. So let's look at some quick fire stats. This is no surprise, but 85% of customers are dissatisfied with the process. We all know from human experience how frustrating it is, but also I've worked with many organizations, and when it's high up on the overall complaints list, not just the complaints about the IVR process. Secondly, it takes a lot of time, and when I'm not just doing the traditional AHT-focused call center view here, for customers, none of us like to, as Guy said, none of us really want to call in. It's not that much fun, and then being taken through a long authentication process, makes it even worse. So what we're finding, it can comprise of 25% of handle time, and across different verticals, it is slightly different. Telcos, probably 20 seconds, 25 seconds typically, and it starts to increase when you go right up to financial services, where you're talking, more stringent processes of 45 seconds upwards is typical there. And finally, it's expensive. So this is costing on average 52 cents for every call. That's US cents, not European cents. And globally, that means $15 billion is being spent on authentication, and that's just the actual cost from call duration. If you look at the cost of fraud, we know that from research, 90% of fraud events have at least one contact in the call center. So there's a huge cost both in people costs and in fraud. So what is real-time authentication and voice biometrics? So let me just take you through what the shape of the application. So we authenticate customers by leveraging voice biometrics in real time. So NICE with a background in interaction capture can use that expertise, and we have all the call recordings of the customers, so we can make a database of the customer's voice prints. And the key point around this is seamless passive enrollment, which really means you as customers are seamlessly and passively enrolled, so there's no effort at all to be part of this, so you don't have to set up some sort of active password like you do with an IVR. And once you're enrolled, you call into the contact center, and the biometric systems will match your voice print against the database and authenticate you in real time against your claimed identity. The agent will then receive real-time prompts, so the system will either tell the agent that you're authenticated, or if you fail to authenticate, then it will prompt the agent through the traditional authentication process. So if we look at a real case study here, we've got your traditional 3 elements of a contact, greeting and problem description at the start, the authentication taking typically 30 to 45 seconds, and then onto the service part of the call. By using voice biometrics, you can authenticate in real time using the customer's natural speech in the first 15 seconds of the call. So in your normal problem description and greeting. And what that enables you to do is eliminate that and go straight into service. So, this gives you a couple of options. The saving of 40 seconds can be used for overall cost savings, or you can use that later for improving customer satisfaction, for cross-selling, for gaining better information from the customer. There are many different techniques you can use here. So, what we're seeing typically is an AHT reduction of 30 to 45 seconds, 60 to 80 cents on every call. It's a significant saving, and it massively reduces customer effort. So, in summary, the customer is authenticated just by listening to their greeting and problem description. The customer isn't aware of the authentication, and the agent doesn't have to do anything.
So this is really quite different from how biometrics was being put forward a number of years ago, where you'd have to people would have to speak details into the computer system. You had a big enrollment process. This is what's known as passive. Is this passive authentication? Passive enrollment. So there's no extra procedure needed for the caller. It actually happens during a normal call, and then it's faster on the second time.
And also, if you think about fraud, because then you have a database of voice prints, and most organizations also have a database of who the fraudsters are, when a fraudster calls in, you can have a blacklist, and it will flash up and say, this is a fraudster, and it's fundamentally changing how you handle fraud.
I think that's an absolutely amazing leap forward, this passive authentication. So I think that's going to make some massive inroads into the authentication zone.
Absolutely. So that's everything from me. As I said, three products that act very closely together and separately that all reduce customer effort.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think there's some great food for thought on there. I particularly love that passive enrollment to get rid of authentication, which I certainly phone in a large number of call centers and wish that could be speeded up. Let's take some tips from the audience. Claire has said, tailor your interaction methods depending on the age. Certain age groups prepare to do it for themselves, i.e. self-care and Twitter forums, and other generations prefer to speak to a human. Scripting doesn't count to get their point across. Why can't we go back to asking customers what they want, not just what the numbers say? I think that's a great example there. And we'll pick one up from Mark, who says it can often be difficult to solve customer problems that originate in a department other than customer service. So we introduced a ticketed system across the company that allows us to raise incidents with those departments. We have a 24-hour service level to adhere to what is basically means if a customer emails with us an issue, the department where the problem originated is targeted to ensure the same problem does not happen to other customers. There's been a massive culture change that's led to reduced customer contacts and improved customer experience overall and a more customer-centric business. Guy, that strikes me as a bit of a win-win situation there.
Yes, absolutely. I think the point there is that if what you're trying to do is turn the tap off, and very often that's the last thing either that contact centers are empowered to do or are enabled to do by the way the organization works.
Very good. So we've got Mark has also said formulate some service values around how to treat a customer and ease the interaction. Champion, celebrate and live by these values, i.e. easy to do business with, raise the bar for customer service, or be the voice of the the customer. I think that ties very nicely, Ed, into your comment about the voice of the customer. We've also had a comment from Lee who says, in your customer experience feedback surveys, ask only a few questions and always lead your survey with a people question, i.e. agent satisfaction, and not a brand question, net promoter score. Ed, I think there's quite a strong link between if you ask about agent satisfaction, you have an ability to start to change behaviors.
Yeah, it's critical to keep them separately, because obviously customers can rate an interaction based on their feeling about the brand, not about the agent. So you have to have a separate measure.
Okay, we're running a little bit short of time, so we'll ask a couple more. Go through a couple more quick tips. We ask customers on the day of their interaction with us how they would like us to contact them throughout their claim. We're a motor claims management company. And we actually follow through on their wishes, which I think is great. The irony of this is that we only have 2 routes in, web submission or phone call, and 3 routes out, phone, email, and paper post. So I think that's channel preference is often one thing that's I think is forgotten about. Let's also pick up, it's a consistent measurement of customer experience metrics, customer satisfaction, net promoter score, effort across all channels and customer interact through. The same question, same scale, the same timing. Then look at the end-to-end journeys to understand what works and what doesn't for the customer, and change the processes. Change processes quickly, don't procrastinate. Test new processes quickly, refine, retest, good until good to launch. Your customers won't wait for you. It sounds this is quite almost systems thinking guy in terms of the sort of almost continuous loop here.
It is, and I think it also relates to an earlier point about what is it the customers are rating. I think one of the problems we've built our industry around a kind of contradictory proposition. We get people to rate agents, but actually it's often the processes those agents are delivering that are causing the problems. When people call back in, they're going to be unlikely to talk to the same agent again. Whereas if you can get them to focus on the process and then change that process, there's actually a real benefit to the customer for providing you with information.
And it looks like Martin has developed a system internally in their contact center. As soon as a call comes in, an automatic window pops up showing all the details about the customer. All necessary steps and actions can be started within this window, e.g. Start a chat or an email, but also access the customer's PC if wanted. Our customers appreciate instant solution and solving it while on the phone. It also gives a great number on customer satisfaction and very little effort. The customer is also addressed from the first second by name and barely any questions needed to find a solution. So I guess there's they found a solution there for authentication, which I think would tie in very nicely. So we're now just hit the end of our time, I'm afraid. If in the chat room you could put in 1 or 2 words about what you liked best about today's webinar. Slides are available if you go to callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars, so you can get copies of all of the presentation slides, and there's also a link to watch a replay of the webinar if you want to share that with your team or with your management team, particularly useful for you. I've got a few more webinars in the series, and just like to say very much thank you to our 2 speakers. Thank you to Guy in Oxford. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. It's been very interesting.
Thank you to Ed Creasy in London. Thank you very much, Ed.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Enjoyed it.
Okay, and that's all we've got time for today, and we'll hopefully be joining you for a webinar next week at the same time. Thank you very much then. Bye-bye, everyone.